Juliet Banks sat in seat 1A, clutching a crystal tumbler of sparkling water, staring down the barrel of a humiliation no amount of corporate status could soften. The man looming over her didn't just want her seat. He wanted her erasure. He adjusted his silk tie, his voice booming through the hush of the first-class cabin like a gavel strike. "Check her ticket again," he sneered, not even looking at her, but addressing the flight attendant. "There has been a mistake. People like her don't sit in international first class unless it's an upgrade error." He didn't know who she was. He didn't know that the text message she had just discreetly sent wasn't to a friend, but to the chairman of the airline's board of directors. By the time this plane touched down in London, his arrogance would cost him more than just a seat. It would cost him his entire livelihood. This is the story of how prejudice met its match at 30,000 feet. The recycled air of the cabin always smelled the same, a mix of expensive leather, faint sanitizing alcohol, and the distinct, crisp scent of exclusivity. For Juliet Banks, it was the smell of another Tuesday. At 34, Juliet was the youngest chief financial officer in the history of Helios Global, a logistics and supply chain conglomerate that moved half the world's cargo. She was tired. It was a bone-deep, marrow-level exhaustion that came from 3 weeks of non-stop negotiations in Tokyo, followed by a red-eye to New York, and now, finally, the last leg to London for the signing ceremony that would cement her legacy. She adjusted the collar of her cream-colored cashmere sweater, letting her head fall back against the headrest of seat 1A. She loved 1A. It wasn't just about the legroom or the privacy. It was the vantage point. You saw everyone coming on, and you saw everyone getting off. It was a position of control, and Juliet lived for control. She pulled her tablet from her bag, the screen illuminating her face. A spreadsheet stared back at her. Millions of dollars in projected revenue, rows of data that made sense to her in a way people rarely did. She tapped a few cells, adjusting a projection, her mind already racing ahead to the boardroom in Canary Wharf. "Champagne, Miss Banks?" Juliet looked up. The flight attendant, a young woman with a tight bun and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, held a bottle of Dom Perignon. Her name tag read, "Felicity." "Just sparkling water with a twist of lime, please, Felicity," Juliet said, her voice soft but firm. She rarely drank when she was working, and she was always working. "Of course," Felicity replied. She placed the glass down with a heavy clink, a fraction harder than necessary, before turning her back to attend to a passenger across the aisle, an older gentleman in a suit who looked like he owned a bank. To him, Felicity offered a beaming smile and a warm conversation about the weather in London. Juliet didn't react. She was used to the microaggressions, the subtle shifts in tone, the way service staff sometimes looked through her to find the real important person in the room. She took a sip of the water, the bubbles sharp against her tongue, and returned to her spreadsheet. She had bigger dragons to slay than a dismissive flight attendant. The plane was an Airbus A380, a double-decker behemoth of the skies. The first-class cabin on this specific configuration was intimate, just 8 suites located at the front of the lower deck. It was quiet, shielded from the chaos of boarding by heavy curtains and sound-dampening walls. Juliet cherished this silence. It was the only time her phone didn't ring. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the soft thrum of the auxiliary power unit. She thought about her father, a man who had worked as a janitor at JFK Airport for 30 years. He used to tell her stories about the people he saw in the first-class lounge, the way they walked, the way they held their heads. "You belong there, Geordie," he'd tell her, his hands rough from bleach and labor, not pushing the broom, sitting in the chair. He had passed away 4 years ago, just before she made C-suite. He never got to see her sit in 1A. A commotion at the front of the cabin pulled her from her reverie. The heavy velvet curtains separating the galley from the cabin were swept aside with aggressive force. Juliet didn't look up immediately. She kept her eyes on her tablet, feigning immersion in the numbers. But her senses went on high alert. The footsteps that entered were heavy, purposeful, the sound of expensive loafers striking the carpeted floor. "No, I specifically requested the bulkhead," a male voice said. It was a voice dripping with the kind of entitlement that is usually inherited, not earned. "I have a meeting the second we land. I need to be the first one off this plane." "Sir, seat 1B is a bulkhead," a second flight attendant's voice soothed. "I don't want 1B, I want 1A. The window view helps me think." Juliet's finger hovered over the tablet. She took a slow breath. "Here we go," she thought. She finally looked up. Standing in the aisle was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a catalogue for aggressive corporate raiders. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", wearing a navy bespoke suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was slicked back, a little too much product, making it shine under the cabin lights. He was holding a leather briefcase in one hand and his boarding pass in the other. He looked to be in his late 40s. He stopped next to her suite. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her seat number, then down at her legs, then at her bag on the floor. "Excuse me," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. Juliet lowered her tablet slowly. She met his gaze with a neutral expression she had perfected over a decade of hostile takeovers. "Can I help you?" The man blinked, as if surprised the furniture was speaking to him. "You're in my seat." Juliet glanced at the small digital display on the suite wall. 1A. She looked back at him. "I believe you're mistaken. This is seat 1A, and I am assigned to it." The man let out a short, incredulous laugh. He turned around, looking for support. Felicity, the flight attendant from earlier, hurried over, her face a mask of concern. For him, not Juliet. "Is there a problem, mister?" Felicity trailed off, waiting for a name. "Carter. Preston Carter," the man announced, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "And yes, there is a problem. This woman is in my seat. I always sit in 1A. It's my company's standing preference." Juliet watched the interaction with the detachment of a scientist observing lab rats. Preston Carter. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it yet. Felicity turned to Juliet. The smile was gone entirely now. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass, please?" I showed it to the gate agent. I showed it to the greeter at the door. And I showed it to you when you directed me down this aisle 10 minutes ago, Juliet said calmly. "Yes, well, mistakes happen," Preston interrupted, stepping closer to her personal space. "Look, honey, I don't know how you managed to sneak in here. Maybe you thought it was open seating like a bus. But this is first class. You need to gather your things. Now." The cabin had gone dead silent. The older gentleman across the aisle lowered his newspaper. A young couple in row 2 stopped whispering. All eyes were on seat 1A. Juliet felt the heat rise in her chest. Not shame, but a burning, focused anger. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply tapped the screen of her phone, unlocking it. "I'm not moving," Juliet said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. "I paid for this seat. It is assigned to me. If Mr. Carter has a preference for 1A, he should have booked it earlier." Preston's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with his tie. He looked at Felicity. "Are you going to let her speak to me like that? Do you know how much I spend with this airline?" Felicity looked nervous. She looked at Preston's expensive suit, then at Juliet's simple sweater. She made a calculation, a fast, biased, and ultimately fatal calculation. "Ma'am," Felicity said, her voice harder now, "I need to see your boarding pass immediately. If you cannot produce it, I will have to ask you to return to your assigned cabin. We have a full flight today, and we cannot have passengers self-upgrading." Self-upgrading. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Juliet held Felicity's gaze for a long second. "You're assuming I'm not supposed to be here." "I'm assuming there is a conflict," Felicity corrected, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Boarding pass, now." Juliet reached into her bag. She didn't pull out a paper pass. She pulled out her phone, navigated to the airline app, and held the screen up. Juliet Banks, Seat 1A. Status, Global Services. Felicity stared at the screen. Global Services was an invitation-only tier. It was for people who spent millions, or who controlled corporate travel contracts worth millions. It was a tier above the top tier. For a second, Juliet saw the flicker of panic in Felicity's eyes, but then Preston leaned in. "Let me see that," he said, reaching for Juliet's phone. Juliet pulled her hand back sharply. "Do not touch my property." Preston scoffed. "It's probably a screenshot. A fake. People do it all the time." "Look at her." He gestured vaguely at her entire being. "Does she look like a Global Services member to you? She looks like she should be bringing me a drink, not sitting in a $5,000 suite." The insult was so gross, so nakedly racist, that the older man across the aisle actually gasped. Juliet placed her phone down on the armrest. She looked at Preston, really looked at him. "Mr. Carter, I am going to give you one chance to walk away, sit in your assigned seat, and never speak to me again." "Or what?" Preston challenged, leaning down so his face was inches from hers. "You'll call your boyfriend? You'll write a bad review?" "Or," Juliet said, "I will ensure that this is the last time you ever fly with this airline." Preston threw his head back and laughed. A loud, barking laugh. "Did you hear that?" he asked Felicity. "She's threatening me. That's a security risk. I don't feel safe flying with a passenger who threatens me." He looked at Felicity with expectation. "Get the purser, actually. Get the captain. I want her off the plane." The air in the cabin had shifted from tense to toxic. It was no longer a disagreement over a seat. It was a power struggle, and Preston Carter was used to winning those. He stood with his hands on his hips, his jacket swept back, dominating the physical space. He was performing for an audience, playing the role of the aggrieved VIP, confident that the system was built to protect men like him. Juliet remained seated. She knew that standing up would be seen as aggression. She knew that raising her voice would be labeled as hysterical or belligerent. She had to remain the coldest object in the room. Felicity, now caught between a rock and a hard place, but still betting on the man in the suit, nodded at Preston. "I will get the lead flight attendant. Please, sir, take seat 1B for just a moment." "I'm not sitting until she's gone," Preston spat. He leaned against the bulkhead wall, crossing his arms, glaring at Juliet. Juliet picked up her water and took another sip. Her hand was steady. Inside, however, her mind was cycling through options. She unlocked her phone again. She opened her messaging app. She scrolled past her assistant, past her sister, and found a contact saved simply as David, CEO. David Sterling was the CEO of the airline. They had attended Wharton together a decade ago. They weren't best friends, but they moved in the same circles. Apex Dynamics, Juliet's previous employer, had handled the cloud migration for the airline's entire reservation system. Juliet had overseen the deal. She typed a message, "On flight 404 to LHR. Seat 1A. Being harassed by a passenger named Preston Carter and staff member Felicity. They are trying to remove me, accusing me of fraud. It's ugly, David. Fix it." She hit send. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then, "What? Give me 5 mins. Don't move." Juliet locked the phone and placed it face down. Moments later, the heavy curtain parted again. Felicity returned, trailing behind a woman who radiated authority. This was the lead flight attendant, or purser. Her name tag read Karen. She was older, with silver in her hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "What seems to be the issue here?" Karen asked, her voice professional but weary. "The issue," Preston interjected before anyone else could speak, "is that this person is in my seat and refuses to leave, and when I asked for verification, she threatened me. I want her removed." Karen turned to Juliet. She didn't have the same sneer as Felicity, but she had the weary skepticism of someone who just wanted the plane to push back on time. "Ma'am, is this true?" "It is not," Juliet said clearly. "I am in my assigned seat, 1A. This man demanded I move because he prefers the window. When I refused, he became abusive and derogatory. Felicity here," Juliet nodded at the younger attendant, "refused to validate my digital boarding pass and accused me of self-upgrading based on nothing but his word." "She showed me a fake app screen," Felicity blurted out. "It said Global Services. There's no way." Karen held up a hand to silence Felicity. She looked at Juliet. "Ma'am, do you have a physical ticket? Or can I see the app?" I showed Felicity the app. She claimed it was a screenshot, Juliet said. "But you can check the manifest, can't you? You have the passenger list on your tablet." Karen nodded. "I do." She tapped the iPad she was holding. She scrolled down the list, her eyebrows furrowed. She tapped the screen again. She looked up at Juliet, then at the screen, then at Preston. "Mr. Carter," Karen said slowly, "you are assigned to seat 1B. "I know that," Preston shouted, causing the couple in row 2 to jump. "I told you there was a mix-up at booking. My assistant always books 1A. Always. This woman obviously took advantage of a glitch, or she swapped the tags. Look, I don't care what your iPad says. I am a platinum partner. I demand you move her." Karen looked at Juliet. "Ma'am, would you be willing to switch to 1B? It's the same suite, just on the aisle. It would help us depart on time." Juliet looked at Karen. This was the pivot point, the moment where the institution tries to compromise with the bully to keep the peace. "No," Juliet said. "Excuse me?" Karen blinked. "No," Juliet repeated. "I will not move. I have done nothing wrong. Asking me to move validates his behavior. It tells him that he can bully a woman out of a seat just because he wants it. I am the victim here, not the inconvenience." Preston stepped forward, his face twisting into a snarl. "Listen here. You, sir," Karen stepped between them. "Back up." "I'm calling the police," Preston announced. He pulled out his own phone. "I'm calling the airport police. I'm telling them there's a trespasser on the plane." "Go ahead," Juliet said coolly. "I'd love for the police to be here." "Oh, you're bluffing," Preston sneered. He dialed a number, putting it on speaker for effect. "Yes, hello? Airport police. I'm on flight 404. I need officers immediately. We have a passenger refusing to follow crew instructions and acting belligerent. Yes, seat 1A. He hung up with a triumphant smirk. "They're coming. Now you're going to get dragged off in handcuffs. Hope you enjoyed the 5 minutes of luxury." Felicity looked smug. "I'll go tell the captain we are holding for law enforcement." Juliet sat quietly. She felt the vibration of her phone against her leg. A text from David, calling the cockpit now, and the station manager. "Hold tight." Juliet looked at Preston, who was now busy texting on his phone, likely bragging to someone about how he was handling a situation. "Mr. Carter," Juliet said, breaking the silence. He didn't look up. "Save your apologies for the cops." "I'm not apologizing," she said. "I'm just curious. Who do you work for?" Preston laughed. "Like you would know. I'm a senior partner at Vanguard Legal. We handle corporate litigation for the biggest firms in the city." Juliet's internal eyebrows went up. Vanguard Legal. She knew them. In fact, Helios Global was currently reviewing outside counsel for a massive antitrust suit. Vanguard was one of the finalists. "Vanguard," Juliet repeated. "Interesting." "Yeah, interesting," Preston mocked. "Means I know the law, and I know my rights. You're trespassing." At that moment, the sounds of heavy boots came from the jet bridge. 2 airport police officers boarded the plane, followed by a man in a high-visibility vest who looked panicked. That was the station manager. "Where is the problem?" the first officer asked, his hand resting on his belt. "Right here," Preston pointed at Juliet. "She's in my seat. She's refused crew instructions, and she threatened me." The officer looked at Juliet. "Ma'am, is this true?" Juliet stood up. It was the first time she had stood since Preston arrived. She was tall, nearly 5'10", and in her heels she looked the officer in the eye. "Officer," Juliet said calmly, "I am Juliet Banks. I am in my assigned seat. This man has been verbally abusive for the last 15 minutes, and before you take any action, I suggest you speak to the gentleman behind you." She pointed to the man in the high-vis vest, the station manager. He was holding a radio that was crackling with activity. He looked pale. He looked at Juliet, then at his clipboard, then at Preston. "Officer, wait," the station manager said, stepping forward. He was breathless. We just got a call from headquarters." Preston smirked. "Good. Tell them to get her off." The station manager looked at Preston with a strange expression. It wasn't deference. It was pity. "Mr. Carter," the manager said, "the call wasn't about removing Miss Banks." "What?" Preston frowned. "The call came from the CEO's office," the manager continued, his voice trembling slightly. "They want to know why Mr. Preston Carter is harassing the CFO of Helios Global." The silence that followed was louder than a jet engine. The silence in the first-class cabin was thick, heavy, and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes an explosion. Preston Carter blinked, his brain seemingly misfiring as it tried to process the station manager's words. "Helios Global? That's impossible." He looked at Juliet, his eyes raking over her again, searching for a flaw in the picture, desperate to find the imposter he was so certain existed. "You're lying," he stammered, his voice losing its booming confidence and taking on a jagged, hysterical edge. "She's lying. Look at her. She's nobody. She's probably a secretary using her boss's miles." The station manager, whose name tag read Gary, stepped fully into the cabin. He ignored Preston. He walked straight to seat 1A. His demeanor was a complete 180 from the nervous energy he had displayed moments ago. He was now operating under the direct gaze of the C-suite, and he knew exactly where the power lay. "Miss Banks," Gary said, his voice respectful and apologetic. "I have Mr. Halloway on the line from headquarters. He sends his deepest apologies for this catastrophic misunderstanding. He wanted me to personally assure you that your status with us is paramount." Juliet didn't smile. She didn't look relieved. She simply reached into her handbag, a limited edition Birkin that Preston had clearly failed to recognize, and pulled out a slim, gold-plated card case. She extracted a business card and held it out to the police officer, who was still standing there, looking confused. "Officer," Juliet said, her voice smooth as glass, "since my identity is in question, here is my corporate card. You can verify the position and the company." The officer took the card. He read it aloud, his voice flat. "Juliet Banks, Chief Financial Officer, Helios Global Logistics." He looked up at Preston. The officer's expression shifted from neutrality to annoyance. Police officers, generally speaking, do not appreciate being used as pawns in the tantrums of wealthy men. "Sir, it seems you made a false report about a trespasser." "It's a fake card," Preston shouted, spit flying from his lips. He was unraveling. The narrative he had constructed, the one where he was the hero and she was the villain, was collapsing, and his ego couldn't sustain the weight of the truth. "Anyone can print a card. I want to see ID, real ID." "That is enough." The command came from the cockpit door. The captain had emerged. He was a tall man with 4 gold stripes on his shoulders and a face carved from granite. He looked at the scene, his lead flight attendant looking pale, the junior attendant Felicity looking like she wanted to melt into the floor, the police, and the red-faced man in the bespoke suit. "I am Captain Anderson," he announced. "Gary, what is the status?" "Captain," Gary said, gesturing to Juliet. "This is Miss Juliet Banks, a Global Services member and a VVIP. The gentleman in seat 1B, Mr. Carter, has been harassing her, refuses to sit in his assigned seat, and called the police under false pretenses." Captain Anderson turned his gaze to Preston. "Is this true?" I was just trying to get what I paid for, Preston argued, though he took a half step back. I am a senior partner at Vanguard Legal. I demand to be treated with respect. This woman is occupying the seat I prefer. Juliet stood up again. She smoothed the front of her sweater. Captain, Officer, Gary. She acknowledged them with a nod. Then she turned her eyes to Preston. It was time to drop the hammer. Mr. Carter, she began, her tone conversational, almost bored. You mentioned you work for Vanguard Legal. That's very interesting, because as of 8 a.m. this morning, Helios Global began the final vetting process for our new external counsel regarding our European expansion, a contract worth approximately $12 million a year in billable hours. Preston went still. His mouth hung open slightly. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. Vanguard is on the short list, Juliet continued, taking a step toward him. In fact, I believe I have a meeting scheduled with your managing partner, Robert Sterling, in London on Thursday to discuss culture fit. We place a high premium on integrity, inclusivity, and temperament. She let the word hang there. You, Preston croaked. You're the client? I am the client, Juliet confirmed. And right now, I am wondering if Vanguard Legal routinely employs partners who verbally abuse women, waste police resources, and discriminate against passengers based on appearance. Because if this is how you represent yourself in public, I can only imagine how you behave in a courtroom. Preston looked around the cabin. He saw the faces of the other passengers. The older gentleman across the aisle was openly glaring at him now. The young couple in row 2 had their phones out, the camera lenses pointed directly at him. He realized, with a sickening lurch of his stomach, that this wasn't just a dispute. This was contempt. Miss Banks! Preston's voice changed instantly. It became oily, wheedling. He held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. Look, let's not blow this out of proportion. It's been a long day. I'm under a lot of stress. The merger in Tokyo, you know how it is. High pressure. I didn't mean any offense. I really like the window. It helps with my vertigo. Vertigo, Juliet repeated flatly. 10 minutes ago you said it helped you think. Well, yes, that too. Look, I apologize. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me buy you a drink. We can sit down, discuss the Vanguard proposal. I can walk you through our strategy personally. No need to bother Robert with this minor tiff. He reached out as if to touch her arm, a buddy-buddy gesture. Don't! The police officer barked, stepping forward. Juliet didn't flinch. Mr. Carter, there will be no discussion. And there will be no drink, she turned to the captain. Captain Anderson, I do not feel safe traveling with this passenger. He has demonstrated erratic, aggressive behavior, and he has made it clear he views me as inferior. I have work to do on this flight. I cannot work with him looming over me. I agree, Captain Anderson said instantly. He looked at the police officers. Gentlemen, I am denying boarding to Mr. Carter. Please remove him from my aircraft. What? Preston shrieked. You can't do that. I have a ticket. I have rights. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, Captain Anderson said. You are a security risk. Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the Conditions of Carriage. The commander may refuse carriage to any person if their conduct endangers the aircraft or any person or property on board. Get him off. Preston lunged toward seat 1A, perhaps to grab his briefcase, or perhaps in a last-ditch effort to claim the territory. I'm not going anywhere until I get my seat. The two police officers moved with practiced efficiency. One grabbed Preston's left arm, the other his right. Sir, you're coming with us, the first officer said. Get your hands off me. This is assault. I'll sue the airline. I'll sue the police department. I'll sue her, Preston screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Juliet. Resisting arrest will only add to the charges, sir, the officer warned. Charges? What charges? Disorderly conduct, making a false police report, and interfering with a flight crew, the officer listed. Walk, now. The physical removal of Preston Carter was not graceful. For a man who prided himself on dignity and status, he left the first-class cabin looking like a common brawler. He dug his heels into the carpet, forcing the officers to drag him backward. His expensive jacket bunched up around his shoulders, exposing a sweat-stained dress shirt. His tie was askew. "You'll regret this," he yelled, his voice cracking as he was hauled towards the galley curtain. "I am Preston Carter. I make more in an hour than you people make in a year." As they dragged him past the galley and into the connection tunnel that led to the economy cabin, the only exit path currently open due to the jet bridge configuration, the commotion spilled over. Passengers in business class craned their necks. People in economy stood up to see what was happening. Preston, realizing he had an audience, tried to spin the narrative one last time. "Help! Police brutality! I'm being removed for no reason! They're protecting a fraud!" But nobody moved to help him. In the age of smartphones, the court of public opinion operates in real time. Dozens of phones were raised like lighters at a concert, recording every second of his meltdown. They captured his red face, his slurs, his entitlement. They captured the moment he tried to kick one of the officers and was promptly spun around and handcuffed against the bulkhead wall. "That's enough," the officer grunted, clicking the cuffs tight. "You're under arrest." Preston's briefcase was unceremoniously dumped onto the jet bridge floor by Gary, the station manager. The officers marched Preston out, his head forced down, the fight finally draining out of him as the reality of handcuffs set in. Back in seat 1A, the silence returned. But the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't tense anymore. It was apologetic. Juliet sat down. She felt a slight tremor in her hands, the adrenaline dump. But she breathed through it. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. "Miss Banks?" Juliet looked up. It was Felicity. The flight attendant looked terrified. Her hands were shaking as she held a bottle of water. She had lost all of her previous haughtiness. She looked like a child who had broken a vase. I brought you a fresh water, with lime, just like you asked." Felicity's voice was a whisper. "I wanted to apologize. I didn't know. If I had known who you were..." Juliet took the glass. She didn't drink from it immediately. She placed it on the coaster. She looked at Felicity with a gaze that was not unkind, but brutally professional. "That is the problem, Felicity," Juliet said softly. "You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with basic human dignity. You looked at me and saw a trespasser. You looked at him and saw a VIP. You made a choice based on bias, not policy. You didn't check the manifest until you were forced to. I know. I'm so sorry. Please, I need this job. I have rent." Felicity's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not going to ask for you to be fired," Juliet said, and she saw Felicity's shoulders sag in relief. "But I'm going to file a formal report about your conduct. You need retraining, serious retraining, because next time it won't be a CFO in this seat. It will be someone who can't defend themselves, and you will humiliate them just like you tried to humiliate me. I can't let that pass." Felicity nodded, tears spilling over. "I understand. Thank you, Miss Banks." "Go assist the other passengers," Juliet dismissed her. Karen, the lead flight attendant, stepped in. "Miss Banks, I've relieved Felicity of duty for this sector. She will sit in the crew rest area. I will be personally attending to the first-class cabin for the duration of the flight to London. Can I get you anything else? Champagne? Caviar service?" "Just the Wi-Fi code, Karen," Juliet said. "I have work to do." 10 minutes later, the aircraft pushed back. The safety video played. The massive engines roared to life, and the A380 lifted heavily into the sky, banking over the Atlantic. Once the seatbelt sign was off, Juliet reclined her seat slightly. She connected her laptop to the satellite Wi-Fi. It was slow, but it was functional. She opened her email client. She didn't go to her spreadsheet. Instead, she opened a new draft. To David Halloway, CEO, Airline. Subject: Incident on Flight 404. David, thank you for the intervention. It was timely. However, the systemic failure of your ground and cabin staff to follow verification protocols needs to be addressed. I expect a full audit of your VIP training procedures by next month. We can discuss this over lunch when I'm back in New York." She hit send. That was the easy part. Then she opened a second draft. This one was harder. This one required precision. She needed to contact Vanguard Legal, but she wouldn't email Robert Sterling directly yet. That was too direct. She needed to set the stage. She navigated to LinkedIn. She searched for Preston Carter, Vanguard Legal. His profile popped up. Senior partner, expert in corporate litigation, relentless, uncompromising. Juliet smirked. Uncompromising indeed. She saw a notification on her phone. Her sister had sent her a link. Text, "OMG Geordie, is this you? It's trending on Twitter already." Juliet clicked the link. It was a video titled, "Racist Karen Gets Owned in First Class. Watch until the end." The thumbnail was a blurry shot of Preston pointing his finger in her face. The video had been uploaded by the young couple in row 2. It already had 40,000 views. Juliet watched the video. It was damning. The audio was crisp. You could hear Preston say, "Does she look like a global services member to you? She looks like she should be bringing me a drink." You could hear the sneer. You could hear the hate. And then you heard Juliet's voice, calm, collected. "I am the client." The comments were exploding. At user 123. "Who is this guy? Find him." At Justice Now. "That's Preston Carter from Vanguard Legal. I recognize him." At Lawyer Up. "Imagine hiring this guy to defend you." Yikes. At Girl Boss. The way she handled him. Queen. Juliet closed the tab. The internet was doing the work for her. But she wasn't done. She needed to make sure that when Preston Carter woke up tomorrow, or whenever he was released from airport jail, he didn't just have a hangover. He needed to have no career. She began to type an email to her own legal team at Helios Global, to General Counsel. From Juliet Banks. Subject, Vanguard Legal Proposal. Immediate hold. Please pause all discussions with Vanguard Legal immediately. I have encountered a significant character issue with one of their senior partners, Preston Carter, which poses a reputational risk to Helios. I have video evidence of his conduct. We need to pivot to the secondary candidate, Archer and Associates. Also, please draft a formal letter to Vanguard's managing partner, explaining exactly why we are pulling the $12 million contract. I want it sent by morning." She hit send. Juliet took a sip of her sparkling water. It was crisp, cold, and tasted like victory. She looked out the window at the clouds stretching out below her like a white ocean. She was 35,000 feet in the air, untouchable, but the real drama hadn't even started yet. Preston Carter was currently sitting in a holding cell at JFK, likely calling everyone he knew to bail him out. He probably thought he could spin this. He probably thought his firm would protect him. He was wrong. Juliet knew the corporate world better than he did. Money talks, but scandal screams, and she had just handed Vanguard Legal a megaphone. She closed her eyes. She needed to rest, because when she landed in London, she wasn't just going to sign a deal. She was going to finish what started in Seat 1A. She had a meeting with the one man Preston feared most, Robert Sterling, the head of Vanguard, and she had a very special video to show him. The fluorescent lights of the JFK Airport Police holding cell were a distinct, sickly yellow, a stark contrast to the warm, mood-lit ambience of the first-class cabin Preston Carter had occupied just 2 hours prior. He sat on a metal bench bolted to the floor, his expensive suit jacket folded awkwardly on his lap to protect it from the grime he imagined was everywhere. He had been processed, fingerprinted, and cited for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. It was humiliating, but in Preston's mind, it was a temporary glitch, a misunderstanding that money and connections would erase. As he waited for the desk sergeant to return his personal effects, he rehearsed the speech he would give to the managing partner of Vanguard Legal, Robert Montgomery. He would frame it as a stress-induced incident, perhaps hint that the airline staff had been the aggressors. He was a rainmaker for the firm. They would protect him. "Carter," the sergeant barked, sliding a plastic tray across the counter. "Sign here. You're released on your own recognizance. Court date is in 3 weeks. Preston snatched his belongings, his watch, a Patek Philippe, his wallet, and his phone. He turned the phone on. It vibrated instantly. Then it vibrated again and again. It buzzed continuously for a full 60 seconds, a frantic, angry insect in his hand. He had 42 missed calls, 68 text messages, and hundreds of email notifications. He opened his texts first. The most recent one was from his wife, Catherine. Sent 10:15 p.m. "I saw the video. The kids saw the video. Don't come home tonight. I mean it, Preston. I'm taking the boys to my mother's." Preston frowned. Video? He opened Twitter. He didn't have to search for it. It was the #1 trending topic in the United States. #first-class racist. He clicked the hashtag. His stomach dropped as if the floor had vanished. There he was, in high definition, screaming at a calm, composed black woman. The angle was unflattering, capturing the veins bulging in his neck, the spittle flying from his mouth. But the audio was the nail in the coffin. "Does she look like a global services member to you? She looks like she should be bringing me a drink." He scrolled down. The comments were a landslide of vitriol. People had found his LinkedIn. They had found his firm. They had found his home address. "No," Preston whispered, standing in the middle of the police station lobby. "No, no, no." His phone rang again. It was Robert Montgomery. Preston answered immediately, his voice breathless. "Robert, thank God. Listen, it's a setup. The video is edited. I was provoked. The woman, she—" "Shut up, Preston." Robert's voice was ice cold. It was the voice of a man who was watching his life's work catch fire. "Robert, I can explain." "You cannot explain." Robert cut him off. "I just got off the phone with the General Counsel of Helios Global. They are pulling the $12 million contract. They are pulling it, Preston. And they are citing gross misconduct by senior leadership as the reason. I can fix it," Preston stammered. "I know Juliet Banks. I met her. I can smooth this over. I'll fly to London. I'll meet her there. I'll apologize. I'll get on my knees if I have to." "You are suspended, Preston," Robert said. "Your access to the building is revoked. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Do not go to London. Do not represent the firm." "Robert, please. If I get the contract back, this all goes away. People have short memories. Just give me 24 hours. "You have done enough," Robert said. "HR will be in touch regarding the terms of your severance." The line went dead. Preston stood there, the silence of the phone deafening. Severance? No, he was a partner. They couldn't just fire him. He had equity. He had rights. A desperate plan formed in his mind. Robert was wrong. Robert was old school. He didn't understand that everything was negotiable. If Preston could just get to Juliet Banks before the official meeting in London, if he could show her he was a human being, a man under stress, he could charm her. He was good at charming people when he wanted to be. He could save the deal. And if he saved the deal, Vanguard couldn't fire him. He looked at the departures board. The next flight to London Heathrow was in 2 hours on a rival airline. He marched to the ticket counter. He pulled out his sleek, black, corporate credit card. 1 seat, first class to London, he demanded of the agent. The agent typed for the moment, then frowned. "I'm sorry, sir. This card has been declined." "Try it again," Preston snapped. "It has a $100,000 limit." "Declined. Pick up card is the instruction from the bank," the agent said, reaching for it. Preston snatched the card back. Robert wasn't bluffing. They had cut him off. He pulled out his personal debit card. He knew there was only about $2,000 in that checking account. Most of his money was tied up in investments and joint accounts his wife controlled. "How much for economy?" Preston asked, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. 1,400, the agent said. "Middle seat, Row 48. Preston closed his eyes. He thought of seat 1A. He thought of the champagne he hadn't drunk. "Book it," he whispered. The flight was a nightmare. Preston Carter, 6'2" and accustomed to lay-flat beds, was wedged between a crying toddler and a backpacker who smelled of patchouli oil. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Juliet Banks's face, cool, impassive, judging him. He didn't have Wi-Fi. He couldn't afford the $20 fee, so he spent 7 hours stewing in his own anxiety. By the time the plane touched down at Heathrow, he looked like a wreck. His suit was wrinkled beyond repair, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had a shadow of stubble on his jaw. He took the Heathrow Express train into the city, ignoring the stares of fellow passengers. He checked his phone. The video had hit 10 million views. Major news outlets were picking it up. CNN had a segment running, "Flying While Black, Executive Humiliated by Top Lawyer." He was famous, but for all the wrong reasons. He checked the time. The meeting between Helios Global and Vanguard Legal was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Vanguard satellite office in the Shard. It was 9:15 a.m. He hailed a taxi. "The Shard," he told the driver, "and step on it." He was going to crash the meeting. It was a suicide mission, but Preston Carter was a man who believed he could talk his way out of a firing squad. He was about to find out that Juliet Banks held the gun, and she wasn't missing. The conference room on the 34th floor of the Shard offered a panoramic view of London, the Thames winding like a grey ribbon through the historic city. But nobody was looking at the view. Juliet Banks sat at the head of the mahogany table. She looked immaculate. She was wearing a tailored navy pantsuit, her hair pulled back in an elegant twist. There were no signs of the stress from the flight. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield she had already conquered. To her right sat her team from Helios, the General Counsel and 2 senior VPs. Opposite her sat Robert Montgomery, the managing partner of Vanguard Legal. Robert was 60, a man of gravitas and old money, but today he looked diminished. Beside him sat 2 junior partners, looking terrified. "Miss Banks," Robert began, his voice somber. "I want to start by expressing my profound personal apologies. The behavior exhibited by Mr. Carter is abhorrent to everything Vanguard stands for. We have already issued a public statement condemning his actions." Juliet nodded slowly. She tapped a pen against her notebook. "Statements are easy, Robert. Culture is hard. You say this behavior is abhorrent to your firm, yet Mr. Carter rose to the level of senior partner. He was your top biller. That suggests his aggression was not only tolerated, but rewarded, as long as it was directed at the right targets." Robert flinched. "I assure you, we are taking steps. Mr. Carter has been suspended pending an investigation." "Suspended?" Juliet raised an eyebrow. "Not terminated?" "The partnership agreement is complex," Robert sighed. "Removing a specific equity partner requires a vote, which we are organizing. But legally, we have to follow process." "I understand process," Juliet said. "But Helios cannot be associated with a firm that harbors liabilities like Preston Carter. The risk is too high. If he treats a client like that in public, imagine what he does in private discovery. Imagine the juries that will hate him on sight." "We will assign a new team," Robert pleaded. "I will lead it personally. We can offer a 20% discount on the first year's retainers." Juliet didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch. She was enjoying this, not out of cruelty, but out of a sense of rebalancing the scales. For years, she had been the one hoping for approval. Now she was the arbiter of it. Suddenly there was a commotion in the hallway outside the glass-walled conference room. "Sir, you can't go in there! Sir!" a receptionist's voice cried out. "Get out of my way! I'm a partner!" The heavy glass doors swung open. Preston Carter burst into the room. The silence that fell was absolute. He looked manic. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his tie was gone, and his face was slick with sweat. He was carrying his briefcase like a shield. "Preston!" Robert Montgomery stood up, his face turning purple. "What the hell are you doing here? I told you to stay away." "I had to come," Preston panted, ignoring his boss and locking eyes with Juliet. "Miss Banks, Juliet, please." He walked towards the table. The Helios security detail, 2 large men standing by the wall, stepped forward, but Juliet raised a hand to stop them. "Let him speak," Juliet said calmly. Preston slumped against the back of an empty chair. He looked at Juliet with desperate, wide eyes. "Juliet, please, you have to understand. I'm not a racist. I'm really not. I have black friends. I do pro bono work. Yesterday I was on medication. For my back. It mixed with the stress. I didn't know it was you. If I had known—" "Stop," Juliet said. One word, softly spoken, but it hit him like a physical blow. "If you had known," Juliet repeated. "That is the crux of the problem, Preston. You only treat people with respect if you think they have power, if you think they are someone. When you looked at me, you didn't see power. You saw a target. You saw someone you could displace because you felt entitled to my space." "I made a mistake," Preston cried. "Don't destroy my life over a seat. I have a mortgage. I have kids in private school. This contract, it's my career. If I lose this, I lose everything." "You didn't lose this contract, Preston," Juliet said, standing up. She picked up a remote control from the table and pointed it at the large screen on the wall. "You lost it the moment you opened your mouth." She pressed a button. A document appeared on the screen. It wasn't the contract. It was a screenshot of Vanguard Legal's own bylaws. "I did some reading on the flight over," Juliet said, walking towards the screen. "Section 14, Paragraph C of your partnership agreement. A partner may be terminated immediately for cause, without severance, if their conduct results in significant reputational damage to the firm or the loss of a key client due to gross negligence or moral turpitude." Preston stared at the screen. He knew that clause. He had written it. "I am the key client," Juliet said, "and I am officially notifying Vanguard Legal that we are terminating our relationship. Not because of price, not because of expertise, but because of you." She turned to Robert. "Robert, here is your cause. You don't need a vote. You have a firing cause handed to you on a silver platter. If you want any hope of Helios ever considering Vanguard for even a parking ticket dispute in the future, you will execute this clause. Today." Robert Montgomery looked at Preston. The look was no longer one of anger. It was one of self-preservation. "Preston," Robert said quietly, "hand over your badge." "Robert, no," Preston whispered. "You can't. You flew here against direct orders," Robert said, his voice gaining strength. "You crashed a client meeting. You are trespassing. And Juliet is right. You triggered the moral turpitude clause." Robert pressed the intercom button on the table. "Security, please remove Mr. Carter from the building and call the London police if he resists." Preston looked around the room. He saw the cold faces of his colleagues. He saw the impassive faces of the Helios executives. And finally, he looked at Juliet. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smiling. She was simply looking at him as if he were a column of numbers that didn't add up, a bad investment that had finally been written off. "Goodbye, Mr. Carter," Juliet said. 2 security guards entered. They didn't need to drag him this time. Preston Carter was broken. He let his briefcase drop to the floor. He turned and walked out, his shoulders hunched. A man who had flown so high on the wings of privilege that he forgot the ground existed, until he hit it. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Vanguard Legal terminated Preston Carter for gross misconduct, citing the moral turpitude clause Juliet had highlighted. He lost his partnership, his equity, and millions in severance. Simultaneously, the airline issued a lifetime ban, and the district attorney filed criminal charges for the false police report. 6 months later, Juliet Banks sat in the Heathrow lounge. Her European deal was a massive success, boosting Helios stock by 15%. A notification on her tablet brought a faint smile to her face, a Wall Street Journal alert confirming Preston's law license had been suspended for 2 years. "Miss Banks, we're ready for you," the agent beamed. Juliet boarded, settling back into seat 1A. The airline had since implemented the Banks Protocol, a rigorous mandatory bias training program inspired by her stand. As the jet engines roared to life, Juliet looked out the window, thinking of her father, the janitor who dreamed she would one day sit here. She hadn't just proven her right to the seat. She had changed the system for everyone who would come after. The plane lifted off, and Juliet finally rested, untouchable in the sky. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of how one man's arrogance collided with one woman's excellence. It's a reminder that in today's world, character is your most important currency, and prejudice is a debt that eventually comes due with interest. Preston Carter thought his suit and his title gave him the right to displace someone he viewed as lesser. He learned the hard way that true power isn't about how loud you shout, but how firm you stand. Juliet Banks didn't just keep her seat. She cleared the air for everyone who comes after her. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold at 30,000 feet, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, have you ever dealt with a Preston in your life? How did you handle it? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.